From the moment I could form memories, my older brother Jason's presence loomed over me like an unshakable shadow. To our parents, he was a prodigy, the golden child who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was the afterthought, the other son who never quite measured up. Their favoritism wasn't overt. It was in the little things. The way they celebrated his every achievement, while my successes barely warranted a nod. It was a silent erosion of my worth that began to shape the contours of my life. Jason thrived in the spotlight. He had this charm that could disarm anyone, a magnetic quality that masked his cruel streak. He didn't need fists to torment me. His words were sharp enough. My love for books, my stutter, my clumsiness in sports, everything became a target for his derision. And when I pushed back, it was always me who was scolded. Jason didn't mean it, they'd say. He's just trying to toughen you up. By my teenage years, I realized the truth. Jason wasn't just their favorite. He was their creation, molded to perfection. And I was the flawed contrast. The pivotal moment came in my senior year of high school. After months of grueling effort, I won a statewide science competition. I'd never felt so proud, so sure I'd finally earned my parents' recognition. That night, we had a family dinner to celebrate, or so I thought. As I beamed with pride, my father raised his glass to toast Jason's acceptance into a prestigious university. "Let's not forget who's really going places in this family," he quipped, and the room erupted in laughter. My accomplishment, my moment, evaporated. That night, I vowed to leave, to carve out a life far from their suffocating grip. By 2015, I had fulfilled that promise. I met Sarah, a woman who saw me, not Jason's shadow. She was kind, ambitious, and unshakably genuine. In her, I found a sense of belonging I'd never known. We married within a year, and for the first time, I felt like I had something Jason couldn't touch. But Jason had a way of finding cracks in even the strongest foundations. At first, his interest in Sarah seemed harmless. During family gatherings, he'd shower her with compliments, his gaze lingering a beat too long. He'd offer unsolicited advice about her career or share inside jokes that I didn't understand. I tried to brush it off, but the tension was palpable. When I confronted him, he laughed it away, calling me paranoid. Our parents dismissed my concerns with their usual refrain. "Jason's just being friendly." In 2017, Jason's fixation intensified. Freshly divorced, he began showing up uninvited, claiming he needed family time to heal. But his visits were always at our house, always when Sarah was home. He'd organize elaborate family events, ensuring Sarah would attend, while making subtle digs at my career, my parenting, my life. It was like he was testing the strength of our marriage, searching for weaknesses he could exploit. The breaking point came late one night in 2018. Sarah and I had just returned from a date when I noticed a text on her phone, a message from Jason. It was innocuous on the surface, something about a family dinner, but the familiarity in his tone, the way he addressed her, set off alarm bells. Sarah assured me it was nothing, but the unease took root. Over the next few weeks, her behavior shifted. She grew distant, distracted, as if she were carrying a burden too heavy to share. Meanwhile, Jason was uncharacteristically quiet, his smug smirk replaced with a veneer of concern. I tried to bridge the gap with Sarah, to understand what was driving the wedge between us, but the answers were elusive. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, everything unraveled. My world was about to collapse, but the full scope of Jason's plan was still hidden in the shadows, waiting to strike. By the time 2018 rolled into spring, my life had turned into a silent battlefield. Jason had gone eerily quiet, his usual provocations and visits suddenly ceasing. At first, I thought it was a reprieve, but the stillness felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Sarah's distance only deepened, her once bright eyes clouded with something she wouldn't share. Unbeknownst to me, Jason was moving the pieces of his twisted game into place, and Amanda was about to enter the picture. Amanda arrived in my life like a bolt from the blue. She first reached out through social media, presenting herself as a casual acquaintance, a co-worker from an old job who had stumbled across my profile. Her messages were light, friendly, even nostalgic. She claimed to have admired my work ethic back then, peppering her words with just enough familiarity to make me believe her story. At the time, I saw no harm in responding, though I kept my tone polite and distant. At first, her messages were sporadic, a casual "how have you been?" or "remember that project we worked on?" Over the weeks, her tone shifted, becoming more personal, more persistent. She began to weave a narrative of her own life. A messy breakup, a toxic workplace, a sense of isolation that mirrored my own. Her timing was impeccable. Just as my marriage felt like it was fraying at the seams, Amanda positioned herself as a sympathetic ear. I didn't realize I was being ensnared. As the weeks turned into months, Amanda's messages became harder to ignore. She started sending photos of herself, selfies that felt oddly intimate for someone I barely remembered. She shared inside jokes that I didn't recall being part of, slipping them into conversations as if to create a false sense of history. When I expressed confusion, she deftly redirected. Her response is always smooth practiced. Her words were carefully chosen, each one chipping away at my defenses. I began to dread her messages, but deleting them felt rude, and confronting her seemed unwarranted. It was a small irritation I foolishly thought would fade. What I didn't know was that Jason was orchestrating this from the shadows. Amanda wasn't a coincidental figure from my past. She was a plant, handpicked to dismantle my life piece by piece. Jason had used his connections to find someone who could play the role convincingly, someone desperate enough to carry out his scheme for a price. Amanda's fabricated history with me was just the beginning. One day, Amanda's tone shifted dramatically. She sent me a long message about how she felt misunderstood and undervalued, claiming she had no one else to turn to. She implied that our conversations had been a lifeline for her, something she desperately needed to keep going. Then came the bombshell. Amanda confessed she had feelings for me. I froze, unsure how to respond. My instinct was to cut off contact, but something stopped me. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was confusion, but I hesitated. That hesitation would cost me dearly. Amanda's messages took a darker turn. When I didn't reciprocate her feelings, she grew accusatory, suggesting that I had led her on, that my polite replies had given her hope. She hinted at sharing our conversations with others, twisting them to imply they were more than they were. Her messages became erratic, peppered with fabricated details designed to make me doubt my own memory. By the time I realized what was happening, a man had already amassed a digital arsenal of carefully doctored screenshots and emails. The breaking point came when Sarah confronted me with the screenshots. The images Amanda had sent were damning, a string of messages that painted me as a willing participant in an emotional, even physical affair. I tried to explain, but the evidence was overwhelming. Jason's fingerprints were all over it, though they remained invisible to everyone but me. He had turned Amanda into a weapon, and now he wielded her with precision. Sarah's heartbreak was palpable. She didn't yell or accuse. She simply looked at me with eyes full of betrayal, asking how I could do this to her, to us. My protests fell on deaf ears. The screenshots, the messages, Amanda's tearful confession. It was all too much for Sarah to ignore. Jason had orchestrated it perfectly, ensuring that my downfall was as public and devastating as possible. Within weeks, my life unraveled. Sarah filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. My parents, swayed by Jason's carefully constructed narrative, expressed their profound disappointment in me. Friends I had known for years distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone accused of such betrayal. I was left isolated, drowning in a sea of lies I couldn't disprove. Jason, of course, played the part of the supportive brother flawlessly. He consoled Sarah, attended family gatherings with an air of quiet dignity, and subtly ensured that his version of events became the accepted truth. He even reached out to me, offering hollow words of advice, his smirk barely concealed behind a mask of concern. I knew then that Jason wasn't just trying to ruin me. He wanted to replace me. As 2018 drew to a close, I found myself at rock bottom. Amanda disappeared as quickly as she had arrived, her role in Jason's plot complete. I had lost my marriage, my family, my reputation, everything I had fought so hard to build. Jason had taken it all, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't finished. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of determination flickered. Jason may have won this battle, but the war was far from over. 2019 began as a year of survival. After the destruction Jason had unleashed on my life, I relocated to a small town far from the suffocating reach of my family. The move wasn't a choice born of hope but of necessity. I needed to escape the whispers, the pitying stares, and the suffocating weight of a ruined reputation. Alone in an unfamiliar place, I realized I had two options. Let Jason's schemes define me or rebuild from the ashes. At my lowest, an unexpected lifeline appeared in the form of David, an old acquaintance from college. David ran a modest but thriving consulting firm and had heard through mutual connections about my plight. He reached out with an offer, a position on his team, far removed from my former career but stable and, more importantly, far from prying eyes. With nothing to lose, I accepted. What started as a means to pay bills evolved into something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. David's mentorship went beyond work. He introduced me to therapy, something I had resisted for years, dismissing it as unnecessary. But in those sessions, I found clarity. For the first time, I confronted the wounds of my childhood. The constant comparisons to Jason, the subtle erasure of my worth, and the deep-seated resentment that had taken root in my heart. Therapy didn't erase the pain, but it gave me tools to navigate it, to untangle the web of emotions Jason had left in his wake. Around the same time, I began to focus on my physical health. Running became an outlet for my anger and frustration, each mile a small victory over the chaos Jason had wrought. As my body grew stronger, so did my resolve. The narrative Jason had crafted was a prison, but I was beginning to find the key to escape. By mid-2019, my life had stabilized. Work was fulfilling. Therapy was transformative, and I had even begun to forge new friendships. But the true turning point came in the form of Laura. We met through mutual friends at a casual dinner. And while I had no intention of pursuing a relationship, something about her disarmed me. Laura was kind but firm, compassionate yet unflinchingly honest. She saw through my guarded exterior, refusing to let me hide behind the walls I'd built. Slowly, cautiously, I let her in. Laura became a beacon of light in my life. She didn't shy away from my scars or the messiness of my past. Instead, she embraced it, helping me see beyond the wreckage Jason had left behind. Together, we built a relationship founded on trust and understanding, something I had feared I would never find again. But as my personal life flourished, reminders of my past lingered like shadows. In late 2019, I received an anonymous email. The subject line simply read, "Truth." Inside was a link to a folder containing damning evidence against Amanda and, by extension, Jason. Screenshots of their conversations, payment records, and even a recording of Jason bragging about how he had orchestrated my downfall. My hands trembled as I read through the files, a mix of rage and vindication coursing through me. The revelation was a lifeline, but it also posed a dilemma. Should I use this evidence to expose Jason, risking further upheaval, or let it remain in the shadows and focus on the life I was rebuilding? Laura was my anchor during this time, offering support without pushing me in either direction. She reminded me that my worth wasn't tied to vengeance, that healing didn't require destruction. Still, the pull to confront Jason was strong. As 2020 began, the pandemic brought its own set of challenges, but in the isolation of lockdown, I found unexpected clarity. The evidence against Jason remained untouched, a secret I wasn't ready to unleash. Instead, I turned my attention to reconnecting with my daughters, Olivia and Chloe. Through therapy sessions arranged with Sarah's reluctant approval, I began to rebuild the bridge Jason had burned. My daughters, who had only known Jason as the doting uncle, were hesitant at first, but slowly, through shared stories and patient conversations, they began to see me for who I truly was, their father. My relationship with Sarah remained strained, but the walls of animosity began to crack. She had remarried, her new husband a quiet, steady presence in my daughters' lives. While I harbored no illusions of reconciliation, there was a fragile peace between us, one built on mutual love for our children and a shared disdain for Jason's manipulations. As the year progressed, Laura and I grew closer, eventually moving in together. Her unwavering support was a balm for the wounds Jason had inflicted, her laughter a reminder that life could still hold joy. By the end of 2020, we were engaged, a quiet ceremony planned for the following spring. Laura was pregnant with our first child, a symbol of the new life we were building together. And yet, as I stood on the precipice of this new chapter, Jason's shadow remained. The evidence against him was a weight I couldn't ignore, a reminder of the injustice that had reshaped my life. But for the first time, I felt in control of the narrative. Jason's schemes had stolen years from me, but they wouldn't steal my future. As 2021 dawned, I resolved to focus on what mattered: my family, my healing, and the life Laura and I were creating. Jason's reckoning could wait. For now, my victory lay not in vengeance, but in reclaiming the happiness he had tried to destroy. The year 2021 brought a strange mix of tranquility and tension. On one hand, my life with Laura and our impending parenthood offered a glimpse of a bright future. On the other, the weight of Jason's betrayal remained an unshakable specter. As I prepared to welcome my new child into the world, I resolved to put my focus entirely on my family. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It was a humid summer evening when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, I answered, and the voice on the other end sent a jolt through my system. It was Amanda. After 3 years of silence, hearing her voice felt like reopening an old wound. She spoke quickly, her words tumbling over each other. She had seen the folder of evidence, the one anonymously sent to me. What she revealed next shook me to my core. Amanda confessed that Jason's manipulation hadn't ended with me. Over the years, she had been coerced into framing others, each time receiving financial compensation in exchange for destroying lives. But something had changed. Jason had cut ties with her after her latest assignment, leaving her with nothing but guilt and fear. She wanted out, and she believed that coming clean to me might be her only way to undo the damage she'd caused. Listening to Amanda, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions: anger, vindication, and a small, reluctant sliver of pity. Her story painted Jason in an even darker light, if that were possible. He hadn't just ruined me. He had turned Amanda into a weapon of mass destruction, wielding her against anyone who threatened his perfect facade. The realization churned in my gut, reigniting my desire to bring him down. Amanda's call set off a chain reaction. She agreed to provide a sworn affidavit detailing everything: her involvement in my framing Jason's role and the other victims he had targeted. With her testimony, the evidence I held gained new weight, enough to threaten Jason's carefully curated image. But exposing him now would come at a cost, one that might ripple through my fragile new life. As I mulled over my options, another bombshell dropped. During a brief conversation about our daughters, Sarah revealed a shocking detail. Jason had tried to win her over during the fallout of our divorce. His overtures hadn't stopped at comforting her. He had actively pursued her, even going so far as to suggest they build a future together for the sake of the girls. Sarah's voice wavered as she admitted that, for a brief moment, she had considered it. Jason's charm, his manipulative assurances, had almost convinced her, but in the end, she had seen through his facade, choosing to keep her distance. Hearing this sent a fresh wave of rage coursing through me. Jason's obsession with dismantling my life wasn't just about sibling rivalry. It was about control. He didn't just want to replace me. He wanted to erase me, to claim every aspect of my existence as his own. The realization was both horrifying and liberating. For the first time, I saw Jason not as an insurmountable adversary, but as a deeply flawed, insecure man whose power came from exploiting others. In the midst of this storm, Laura went into labor. The arrival of our son, Noah, was a moment of pure, unfiltered joy. Holding him in my arms, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. Jason's shadow might still loom over my past, but my future was mine to shape. Noah's first cries were a reminder that my energy belonged to the people who mattered most: Laura, Olivia, Chloe, and now, this tiny new life. But life, as always, had a way of pulling me back into Jason's orbit. Just weeks after Noah's birth, I received an invitation to a family gathering. My parents, blissfully unaware of the depths of Jason's schemes, were hosting a celebration for their wedding anniversary. Against my better judgment, I decided to attend. I wanted to introduce Noah to his grandparents, to show Olivia and Chloe that I wasn't afraid to reclaim my place in the family. But more than that, I wanted to face Jason on my terms. The gathering was tense from the start. Jason greeted me with his trademark smirk, his eyes darting to Laura and Noah with barely concealed disdain. The small talk was strained, the undercurrents of animosity palpable. But I held my ground, refusing to let him rattle me. As the evening wore on, I found myself cornered by Jason, his voice dripping with feigned concern. He congratulated me on rebuilding my life, each word laced with condescension. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I leaned in close, my voice low enough for only him to hear. I told him about Amanda's confession, about the evidence I had, and the affidavit she was preparing. Jason's smirk faltered, his confidence cracking for the first time. The color drained from his face as I detailed exactly how his empire of lies was about to crumble. The confrontation ended as quickly as it began, with Jason retreating into the crowd, his mask of composure barely intact. For the rest of the evening, he avoided me, his eyes flickering with a mix of rage and fear. It was a small victory, but a significant one. For the first time, I saw Jason not as the untouchable golden child, but as a man on the brink of losing everything. As Laura and I drove home that night, I felt a strange sense of peace. Jason's reckoning was no longer a distant possibility. It was imminent. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had faced him, not as the broken man he had tried to destroy, but as someone stronger, someone ready to reclaim what was rightfully his. The week following the family gathering was a whirlwind of decisions. With Amanda's affidavit now in hand, the time had come to expose Jason. The evidence was damning, a meticulously detailed account of his manipulations, the lives he had ruined, and the lengths he had gone to protect his reputation. But what struck me most was how fragile his empire truly was. Jason's power thrived on secrecy and deception, and with the truth now in my hands, I held the key to dismantling it. I arranged a meeting with my parents, Sarah, and a few close family friends. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that Jason would have chosen for one of his carefully orchestrated gatherings. This time, however, it wasn't about him. When everyone was seated, I began to speak. My voice trembled at first, but as I laid out the evidence, the words flowed with a conviction I hadn't known I possessed. I started with Amanda's testimony, detailing how Jason had used her to frame me and others. Then I revealed the screenshots and recordings, each piece of evidence painting a clearer picture of Jason's deceit. My parents sat in stunned silence, their faces a mix of disbelief and shame. Sarah's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing as the depth of Jason's betrayal sank in. The friends who had once distanced themselves from me exchanged glances, their guilt palpable. Jason arrived midway through my presentation, his entrance as dramatic as ever. He walked in with his usual air of confidence, but as he noticed the expressions around the room, the smirk faltered. When he saw the stack of documents on the table, his face turned a shade paler. I stood my ground as he tried to interrupt, his voice rising in protest, but the weight of the evidence spoke louder than his denials. "You've spent your entire life taking what isn't yours, Jason," I said, my voice steady. "But this ends now. Everyone here knows the truth. It's over." The room was silent, the gravity of the moment pressing down on everyone present. My parents, who had always seen Jason as their golden child, now looked at him with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. My father finally spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment. "We trusted you, Jason. We believed in you. How could you do this?" Jason's response was a mixture of defiance and desperation. He accused me of fabricating the evidence, of orchestrating a vendetta against him. But his words carried no weight. The proof was irrefutable. As his protests grew more frantic, my mother's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough, Jason. We've heard enough." In the days that followed, the fallout was swift. Jason's reputation crumbled as the truth spread among our extended family and community. The friends who had once flocked to him now kept their distance, unwilling to be associated with his lies. My parents, devastated by the revelations, made the difficult decision to cut ties with him. For the first time in his life, Jason was truly alone. But even as the dust settled, I couldn't ignore the unintended consequences of exposing him. Jason had a daughter, Emily, from his first marriage. She was barely a teenager, caught in the crossfire of her father's downfall. The thought of her suffering for his actions weighed heavily on me. I reached out to Emily's mother, offering support and ensuring she knew I bore no ill will toward their daughter. It was a small gesture, but one I hoped would shield Emily from the worst of the fallout. As for Jason, he disappeared shortly after the revelations. Word spread that he had moved to another state, hoping to escape the scandal and rebuild his life elsewhere. Part of me felt a hollow sense of victory, but another part pitted him. Jason's life had been built on lies, and now that foundation was gone. He would have to face the consequences of his actions, far from the family he had once manipulated so easily. My own life, meanwhile, took on a new sense of clarity. The weight of Jason's shadow was gone, and for the first time in years I felt free. My relationship with Laura deepened as we navigated the challenges of parenthood together. Noah's laughter filled our home, a constant reminder of the joy that had emerged from the chaos. Olivia and Chloe, too, began to reconnect with me, their initial hesitation giving way to trust as they saw the lengths I would go to be part of their lives. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Laura, watching Noah play in the yard, she turned to me and asked, "Do you regret it?" Telling everyone about Jason. I thought about her question for a long moment before answering. "No," I said finally. The truth needed to come out, not just for me, but for everyone he hurt. I just hope that, wherever he is, he's finally learning what it means to be accountable. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were scars that would never fully heal. But as I looked at my family, at the life we had built together, I knew it had been worth it. Jason's reckoning was a chapter one would never forget, but it was just that, a chapter. The rest of my story was mine to write, and for the first time in a long time, the pages ahead felt full of promise.